start, no?
Yes, sir.
All right. Welcome to the MOOCs live session 2 for this course, Ecology and Society. Many of you can, tune in and pour in questions for our discussions. And in the meantime, what I do is quickly give a recap of what we have done in the past few weeks. We begin this course tech nature, which is perceived to be one of the central concerns within the discipline of anthropology, whether it may be in the field of folk sciences and cultural ecology, or maybe in the study of myths and rituals, which are linked to the environment and basically to the subsistence techniques. So in the recent years, within the issue of ecology, it has tends to look at the issues of ecology has been perceived to be sidelined or marginalized within the ambit of the anthropological discussions, as the postmodernism and the culturalist perspective have began to dominate the center stage of these theoretical developments within social science in general. So therefore, it is important in this particular course to reimagine or rethink the nature-society interface, that is by engaging in rethinking ecological anthropology and its notions of the relations between persons, the human society, and the environment, or in other words, nature-culture relations. So of late, the anthropologists realized that nature-culture dichotomy was inadequate or a misleading conception. The ways in which people studied were talking about and interacting with their physical environment. And we have also, delved upon looking at symbols, or in other words, we can see the symbolic anthropology has devoted its attention to look into explaining or understanding many of the indigenous peoples or the native cosmologies, which tends to, not necessarily engaging in categorizing or classifying their components in conformity with the results of the domain specificity. Now, for example, in the totemic systems, the non-humans are, treated as signs, that is, which can sort of contribute or convey a certain kinds of, messages through the use of symbols. And whereas in the anemic systems, they are treated as a term of relation. So therefore, the totemic systems are linked into segmentary organizations and are thus conspicuously absent among societies with slave decision. Whereas in the animist world or the animist system, it is found in the cognitive as well as in the segmentary types of societies. Now, naturalism, on the one hand, is also a form of belief systems, which talks about that nature does exist, and certain things tends to owe their allegiance to their existence and also development to a principle which is extraneous, outside both to the chance and also to the effects of human build. So we have also, touched upon the various modes of categorization. That is how we, as a human society, engage in conceptualizing the worlds of both the humans and non-humans, and which also implies that distributing its elementary components in such a way that this can be, objectified in stable and socially recognized categories. So in this, are dealing with, the modes of categorizations, we also look into the notions of reciprocity, which is an inversions of predations, and it defined those anemic systems in which the relations between humans as well as the relations between humans and non-humans are fueled by a constant exchange of services, food, or generic vitality. For instance, the dominant belief in such systems is that humans have ought or adapt towards the non-humans, primarily because they occupied a sense of, subsistence, or for the food which they have provided, or in other words, the kind of resources which they have provided to humankind. And we have also, looked into the issues of the contested domains and boundaries of culture. Here we take from the lens of, the human evolutionary ecology, which is currently, perceived to be one of the most vigorous areas of research in ecological anthropology. And by employing this particular, perspective, the oppositions of whether it's continuity or discontinuity on the one hand, and on the other, the notions of dominations and protections has been looked upon. For instance, Belsons in his discussions move on to distinguish between the three kinds of human environmental relations by taking chiefly Orientalism, paternalism, and communism, each of which would kind of, represent a particular stance with respect to the environmental issues. So in the case of, environmental Orientalism and paternalism, humans are believed to be or perceived to be masters of nature, and the former are exploits, the latter protects. And we have also touched upon the notions of culture and choice by taking the examples of, the foraging society. So hunters or gatherers or the foragers predominantly live in the environments which are characterized by diverse and heterogeneously distributed resources. So the foragers can choose combinations which more or less effectively and efficiently procure subsistence. And the foragers in this process make choices or make up a strategy of adjustment, particularly with regards to the ecological conditions, and in the process, an adaptive pattern resulting from the evolutionary processes, and then the constraints of situations with the notions of, time and space, and also chance. So hunters in this process are faced with choices that the choices they make up to a pattern, and that this pattern changes in response to alterations in the parameters of hunting they brought about, for example, by the introductions of new tools and technologies. So the hunter's decision conformed pretty much closely to what might be modeled as the optimal strategy for a forager seeking to maximize the net rate of their energy gain. So from then on, we move on to looking at the paradigms in the human environment relationship by taking different concepts like the Orientalism, paternalism, and communism. The modern day ecologists, for instance, continue to engage in looking at and comparing the orders of nature and society as if they are perceived to be a separate autonomous systems and exploring the links between them. So the paradigms of communalism differs from both Orientalism and paternalism in that it tries to rejects the radical separations of nature and society, object and subject, emphasizing notions of dialogue. Now we could see that how nature was perceived in medieval Europe, or the relationship between nature and society. So in medieval Europe, there was no radical separation as such between nature and society, because as Gurevich rightly argues that in medieval times, man thought of himself as an integral part of the world or the ecosystem. So his interrelations with nature was so intensive and thorough that he could not dissociate or look at it from without. And then he was perceived to be an integral part of the system that is with nature, or in other words, part of the ecosystem. And therefore, the environmental Orientalism and paternalism envisage that there is a negative reciprocity in human environmental relations, whereas paternalism, on the other hand, implies that there is a balanced reciprocity by presupposing humans' responsibility. So in both the cases, humans are perceived to be masters of nature. So the third paradigm, that is communalism, emerges out of this by rejecting the radical separations of nature and society, that is object and subject, and also the modernist assumption of othering, certainty and monologue, which add to the dimensions of continuity and discontinuity. So therefore, we could see that the Orientalist exploitations is a paradigm which suggests and also generalize reciprocity in human environmental relations, which invoke the notions of contingency, participations, and dialogue. So therefore, this paradigm not only establishes a fundamental break between nature and society, but it also suggests that people are masters of nature, which are responsible or in charge of this particular world. So another anthropologist by name called Tim Ingold opined that in this colonial regime, the world becomes a tabula rasa for the encryptions of human history. So paternalism, on the other hand, also involves privileging the scientific expertise and inversion in the relative power of experts and the laypersons. So in the modern environmentalist perception, humans have a particular responsibility to meet not only for other humans, but also members of other species, that is to the fellow inhabitants of the animal kingdom and the ecosystems of the globe. So the very notions or vocabulary of Orientalism is typically one of domestication, frontiers and expansion of exploring, conquering, and exploiting the environment for the diverse purposes of production, consumption, and then so on and so forth. So communalism, this paradigm rejects the separations of nature and society and the notions of certainty and monologue by emphasizing instead more on the contingency and dialogue. So unlike paternalism, communalism suggests a generalized reciprocity, that is, an exchange often metaphorically represented in terms of intimate personal relations. So therefore, there is an urging need to develop an ecological theory that fully integrate human ecology and social theory by abandoning any radical distinctions between nature and society, which is often recognized in the current times. So therefore, we have sort of tried to engage upon distinguishing the three different kinds of paradigms with respect to the human environmental relationship, namely Orientalism, paternalism, and communalism. So we move on to trying to make sense or to an attempt to understand nature, culture, magic, and science. That is the relationship between vis-a-vis the relationship between people and environment, particularly the often presumed universal dualism of nature and culture, by citing on the works of another anthropologist by name called Levi-Strauss. So nature culture dualism forms part of this Western ethno-epistemology and derives from a non-universal ontological crisis or the ontological basis. So concepts such as magic and science are investigated in particular reference to their dualist usage in the anthropological discourse and to a wider philosophical debates. So there's no such thing as nature or culture because it is a highly relativized concept whose ultimate signification must be derived from its place within a specific metaphysics, as pointed out by none other than Stratton. So by the 1950s, the anthropological investigations bearing this prefix ethno concerning the cognitive approaches to the native's point of view with regard to the specific sub-branches of the Western science. So therefore, we started, engaging in using terms like the ethnoecology, which has to do with the study of the indigenous knowledge of natural resources and their exploitation based on the works people like Roy Gillett. And the prefix ethno thus indicates that the specific field of knowledge is that of the observed rather than of the observer, as rightly pointed out from the case studies made by Kunglin. So therefore, we could see the totemic relationship of the sharks in the Morocco environment, which talk about to an extent talks about the shark and totemism, entailing prohibitions against harming, provoking, even killing, or most of old, eating sharks is only associated with and practiced by a limited number of localized people of Morocco. So then we also move on to familiarizing ourselves with religion, nature, and environment based on the works of Roy Rappaport, who argues that religion is central to the continuing evolutions of life, although it has been displaced from its original positions of intellectual authority by the rise of modern science. So Roy Rappaport's books, that is Ritual and Religion in the Making of Humanity, could to a large extent explained and could be construed as in some degree religious as well as about religion, which insists that religion can and must be reconciled with science. So he tries to engage in combining both the adaptive and the cognitive approaches to study of humankind, and he mounts a comprehensive analysis of religion's evolutionary significance, seeing it as a coextensive with the inventions of metaphors, language, and hands of culture as we tries to identify and associate with it. And religion, to a large extent, etymologically, binds us to an external force. That is, it tries to stabilizes our meaningful interactions with the world and provides us an anchor for our volatility. For instance, people like Durkheim is an eminent the classical thinkers within the discipline of sociology, argues that religion was perceived to be an organized attempt to bridge the gap between the known and the unknown, which is conceived of as profaned world of ordinary experience and that of the sacred. So therefore, there's an extraordinary world which is located outside that experience. So through the use of rituals and ceremonies, or ritual in particular, Durkheim argues that we worship unrealized powers of shared existence, that is society, and call it God. So sometimes we objectify, the presence or the existence of spirit world as nature, and worship it, and which the in its rudimentary sense we call it totemism or animism. So therefore, Durkheim believed that the central task of rituals was to instill that this collective representations in its own past. So therefore, we could also associate and gaze upon looking at the evolutions of humanity, how all animals communicate, and even plants receive and transmit information, but it is only humans, so far as we know, who are perceived or who possessed of language, that is symbols, signs, etc. So rituals, according to Rappaport, denote the performance of more or less the invariant sequences of the formal acts and utterances, not entirely encoded by the performers. And within the discipline of sociology and anthropology, rituals and ceremony perhaps tends to designate a large range of social events, not all of which are religious as such, or may denote the formal aspects of such. So therefore, ritual is often taken to be a symbolic form, particularly from the studies which is put forward by Dept. For instance, the marine ritual cycles, which Rappaport has to a large extent discusses, constituted a functional ecological theory of ritual in general. So therefore, in this case, the performers of the rituals do not specify all the acts and utterances which constitute their own performance. They follow more or less the orders which are established or taken to have been established by others. So therefore, rituals has been used as a mode of communications, because ritual utterances are not simply a mere words, but frequently which possess a special characteristic, and that may, to a large extent, enhance their seeming force, and so made often noted emphasis on propriety and precision uttering. So these forms of ritual cycles are evident among the Simbaga community of New Guinea, where ritual play an important part in regulating the relationship of these groups with both the non-human components and of their immediate environments, and the human components of their less immediate environments, that is, with other similar territorial groups. So we have also, in the, and we try to engage upon looking at relevant needs of environmental crisis by taking cues from different religions, particularly the Christian religions, Buddhism and Hinduism. So basing upon on the works of Junior Lin White, a historian, particularly on his essay, the historical roots of our ecological crisis, we tend to look into or historicize how religions have taught us to perceive and also to act on the non-human nature in terms of the particular human interest, beliefs, and also the social structures. For instance, questions such as how has religion shaped our understanding and our conduct towards nature, and how has the environmental crisis challenged and transformed modern theology and spiritual practice. So Lin White Jr., to begin with, argued that our Western Christian worldview supports and encourages the exploitation of nature. And then therefore he, to a large extent, critically examined the role of Christian religions, which not only establish or responsible for establishing a dualism of man, whereas other Asian religions such as Buddhism and Hinduism, which have their roles, the scriptures which talks about their roles in conservation of nature. For instance, in Buddhism views humanity as an integral part of nature, so that when nature is defiled, people ultimately suffer. So therefore, we could see that from many of the early Buddhist texts that maintain this kind of friendly attitude towards their natural surroundings and oppose the destructions of forests or their wildlife. And similarly, of course, in the same, in a different paradigm, the Hindu religious literatures, beginning from the Vedas to the contemporary theories, takes up the portion of the text which also elaborate and talks extensively how nature is being linked with human society and why we humans should engage in conserving and preserving nature. And we have also dwelled upon the one issue that is the ecological crisis, a common responsibility, which is written by Pope John Paul II, sort of a rebuttal to what we had discussed by Junior Lin White, where there is a clarion call of how we humans should join hands and equally take a responsibility to solve the existing crisis which we humans encounter. So that's all we have. I briefly tried to summarize what we have done in the last few weeks, and you can write. We have doubts and queries. Please feel free to drop in a mail, and I'll be happy to respond to it. That's all for today, and thank you all for listening. And we'll meet up in the live session 3. Thank you.